I still remember the exact moment my world tipped upside down. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when he slipped the manila envelope onto the dresser beside me, the edges peeking out like a secret he couldn't wait another second to share. His hand trembled as he closed the door behind him, eyes darting away from mine. I stared at that envelope plain, unmarked, heavy with implication, and my heart slammed against my ribcage. He cleared his throat, voice tight. "I need you to open this, but promise me you won't tell a soul." I felt a cold spike down my spine as I tore it open. Inside lay a single sheet of paper printed with columns of letters and numbers. I barely recognized my DNA test results. The words "percent match" and "unexpected lineage" swam before my eyes, and a chill settled over my blood. He stood there silently, as if waiting for a verdict, but all I could do was whisper, "What is this?" His answer? "I did this behind your back, and I need you to keep it a secret." That line, those 5 impossible words, hit me like a fist to the gut. In that instant, I realized I no longer shared the solid ground I'd built our life on. I was standing on shifting ice, staring at a truth he had hidden from me for months. He'd always been proud of our seemingly perfect relationship. 10 years in, 2 kids, the house with the white picket fence. We'd laughed about how he and I were a genetic Lekandki, a match made in dating app heaven. But here was proof that everything I believed about Usabat, our blood bond, about our future together, could be a lie. My fingers shook as I refolded the paper, time stretching until I barely recognized the man in front of me. He swallowed hard, voice cracking. "Please, don't look at me like I'm a monster." I was scared. Scared of what? But instead, I felt the room tilt. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized that in one simple gesture requesting my silence, he had rewritten our entire story. And as I stood there holding those test results, one thought crashed through me. If he could hide something this huge from me, what else did I not know? For 10 years, we thought we had it all figured out. By the time graduation caps flew into the air, we'd moved in together with little more than mismatched furniture and big dreams. I still remember the day we painted our first apartment's walls, a cheerful yellow. Those small moments became the foundation of our life. Friday nights cooking together, Saturday morning coffee runs, and Sunday drives just to explore the winding backroads outside the city. We joked we were partners in crime, always cracking each other up, finishing each other's sentences. Back then, trust felt as natural as breathing by year 3. We'd bought our first house, a modest 4-bedroom with a creaky porch swing and a backyard big enough for a vegetable garden. He planted tomato seedlings he tended like they were his own children, and I painted signposts to label each row. We invited friends over for barbecues and put up string lights for impromptu dance parties in the yard. On our anniversary that year, he surprised me with framed Polaroids of every trip we'd taken. The coastline in Maine, the redwood forests in California, the cobblestone streets of that little town in Italy where we got lost but ended up finding the best gelato. We'd look at those pictures and promise each other more adventures, more nights under the stars. I believed with every fiber of my being that he had nothing to hide. When our daughter was born in year 5, he stood beside me in the delivery room, tears in his eyes as she let out that first tiny wail. We named her after my grandmother, a woman I'd always admired, and he vowed to give our little girl every opportunity in the world. Carrying her on his shoulders at the park, teaching her to ride a bike without training wheels. I found notes in his coat, pocket-scribbled grocery lists or reminders, but also tiny love letters he'd written to me on the back of business cards, promising that no matter how crazy life got, he'd always come home. I never questioned his loyalty. It was written in the way he looked at me, in the way he laughed at my terrible jokes. The certainty began to fray. It wasn't a single moment, it was a collection of quiet missteps that I'd dismissed at the time, saying he'd been stuck in traffic, but never mentioning his phone was off, as though he was unreachable by choice. How could I think twice? We'd built our life on trust, and I wasn't about to let a curiosity question our 10 years together as we approached our 10th anniversary. We felt unstoppable, a family of 3, a thriving business he'd launched from our garage, and a house we'd turned into a home. He cooked pancakes while our daughter splashed in the water, and I sat on the dock, watching them against a backdrop of sunrise, pink and gold. He came to stand beside me, draped his arm around my shoulders, and I thought, this is it. This is what forever feels like. But even then, a tiny whisper of doubt flitted through my mind. Why had he stayed inside so long that morning? Why had his smile felt forced when he finally joined us for breakfast? Back home, the breadcrumbs multiplied. I noticed his files on the shared computer encrypted folders with generic names like Project Alpha, and every time I asked what they were, he claimed they were work-related, classified for a client's privacy. I accepted that answer. After all, I'd signed an NDA when I helped him draft the business plan. But when I tried to open them one day, his password wouldn't work, and I felt that same flicker of unease. Then came the late-night phone calls, where I'd hear just one voice on the other end, hesitating before he'd snap the phone shut. I'd stand at the foot of our bed, listening to the soft click of his study door as he locked it behind him, telling myself it was just stress. That running a company was tough. Still, I clung to our decade of memories. The laughter in our kitchen, the way he held our daughter on his shoulders at her first school play, the road trips we swore we'd take every year. I believed so deeply that our bond was unbreakable that I couldn't see a crack forming beneath the surface. Even when my friends began to ask pointed questions. Have you seen him at your book club meetings lately? Or I heard he flew to Chicago midweek. Without telling you, I shrugged it off. That was life. It never occurred to me that he might hide the truth on purpose. Looking back, I see how the trust I carried became my greatest vulnerability. I thought loyalty meant unconditional belief, but I was blinded by our history. I believed that 10 years of inside jokes and shared dreams made his actions beyond reproach. I thought love would protect me from betrayal. So when he finally handed me that envelope filled with genetic markers that didn't add up, it felt like waking from a dream one, where every laugh, every promise, every shared tear flickered like a fading projection. 10 years of trust suddenly seemed like a grand illusion, and I realized that the solid ground I thought we'd built together was riddled with hidden traps. I closed my eyes, fighting the dizziness of betrayal, and wondered if our past could be rewritten so casually. What did our future hold? Base of my skull I couldn't scratch. He kissed me on the cheek, promised he'd be back by 10, then slipped out the front door, phone already pressed against his ear. The living room clock ticked toward midnight. By 1 a.m., I was tiptoeing down the hallway, toothbrush still in hand, worry knotting my stomach. No answer. I turned the knob and found it locked from the inside. A cold thrill ran up my spine. He'd never locked that door. At 2:30, I heard glass clink somewhere in the house. I crept toward the sound and spotted his leather jacket draped over the back of a dining chair, its pockets strangely splayed open. Inside, a medical-style envelope poked out, its flap sealed with a strip of clear tape. I swallowed, heart hammering, and slipped into the warmth of the jacket. My fingers found the envelope's edges, lifting it free as though handling evidence. On the medical ID label, his name was typed in small letters, no address, no return info, just his name and a date stamped next to it. The 2nd of November 2024. That was 2 days ago. I stood frozen, jacket half in, envelope in hand, mind spinning. How had I missed this? The man I trusted with my life had turned secret agent overnight. I left the envelope on the kitchen counter, emptied my coffee cup, then crept to the study window. The blinds were only half closed and I could see the silhouette of our backyard quiet, empty. No sign of a side door swinging shut, no glint of headlights. I reached for it, dialing his number, but my trembling thumb hit voicemail. I'm in a meeting, call you later. My breath caught. A meeting that lasted into the early morning and left behind locked doors and cryptic medical kits. The next morning I woke at 7 to the hum of the dryer. I climbed the stairs and found him in the kitchen, sipping coffee with a calm expression that didn't reach his eyes. I held up the envelope. What is this? I asked, voice flat. He glanced at it, then away. Just a kit, he said quietly. I ordered a DNA test out of curiosity. I pictured him hunched over that counter in the dead of night, needles and vials spread out like some illicit recipe. He shrugged. I wanted to surprise you with our ancestry results. My stomach twisted. A simple curiosity test wouldn't explain the encrypted folder on his laptop, or the odd phone calls at 3 a.m. by afternoon. Rumors had started to drift through our neighborhood like fallen leaves. The barista at the coffee shop gave me a sympathetic look when I walked in. Hey, you okay? I heard your husband was in all-day meetings. Another neighbor mentioned she saw him slipping into a downtown lab truck late last night, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses, as though he was evading paparazzi. A third said they'd heard the local clinic had shut its test results portal after a breach some private cases had leaked. My mind raced. If his test was so routine, why the cloacan dagger? I downloaded the clinic's news release. A breach had exposed thousands of sensitive patient files. I searched for our names, ours, and my daughter's, but nothing matched. Still, every sign pointed to him hiding something. That evening, I stayed up waiting, dazed, until he thumped down the stairs at 10 p.m., coat slung over his arm. He looked exhausted, 5 o'clock shadow tracing his jaw. I held up the sealed envelope again. Open it, he said in a low voice. My hands shook as I broke the tape. Inside was a single vial labeled sample EG1084, and beneath it, instructions for mailing to another lab in a different state. No results, no explanation, just the evidence of another secret mission. I traced the vial's label with my fingertip. "What were you hoping to find?" I demanded. He met my gaze, eyes haunted. "The truth?" he whispered. "About my past?" His confession tumbled out in whispers. A childhood friend gone missing. A father he never talked about. Stories he'd buried under decades of silence. He discovered a rumor online that he might not be his father's biological son. It had kept him up at night until he couldn't ignore it. He ordered the test to confirm or dispel a lifetime of doubt, and when it arrived, he panicked. Afraid of what it might do to our family if the news was bad, I sank to the floor as he spoke, mind racing through 10 years of vows and promises. If his ancestry was in question, what about our daughters? Our very identity felt unmoored. I realized then that this wasn't about a curious hobby. This was about him chasing ghosts in the hope of peace and dragging me into a truth I never asked for. I looked at the vial again, heartache mingling with compassion. He'd disappeared into secrecy because he was terrified of losing himself and losing us. We sat in the dim kitchen, vial and envelope between us. Outside, cicadas droned in the night air. His shoulders shook with the weight of his confession. "We'll face it together," I said, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, relief and fear mingling in his eyes. In that moment, the unanswered questions felt less like betrayals and more like cracks in the foundation of a man I loved, cracks that needed light and honesty to heal. We sealed the envelope together, deciding to send the sample to a certified geneticist we both trusted. He stayed up the rest of the night, drafting an email of apology for every confused message. Late disappearance, furtive search. I fell asleep on the couch, comforted by the sound of him typing out the hard truths he'd hidden. When morning light filtered through the blinds, I woke to find him asleep at the laptop, head resting on folded arms, envelope unopened. I knelt beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, and in that fleeting moment, understood that sometimes love means trusting even when you're afraid. Me, the envelope, his fingers shook so badly I thought he might drop it. We were standing in the soft glow of the hallway light, the rest of the house asleep around us. He clasped the plain ivory envelope in both hands as if it were a fragile bird. No return address, no scribbles, just my name, Emily Watkins, written in his neat block letters and a single date, the 8th of December, 2024. A chill knot from winter air curled up my spine. He swallowed, eyes fixed on the floorboards. "Open it," he said, voice low. I tore the seal, the paper crackling like dry leaves. Inside lay a sheet of glossy cardstock folded in half. My heart thumped against my ribs as I unfolded it, sensing the weight of every dashed hope and hidden fear in that single moment. Across the top, in fine print, were columns labeled marker, expected match, and actual match. Beneath them, a dozen rows of alphanumeric codes, letters, and numbers I didn't understand, until my eyes found the percentages. For each marker, the expected match was 99.8% or higher, but the actual match read 49.6%. My breath hitched. I stared at those numbers, letting the room tilt. 20 markers, each one half what they should be. The paper trembled in my hand. I frowned, blinking twice, hoping my eyes deceived me. This can't be right," I whispered. He closed the distance between us, standing so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. "I triple-checked it," he said. "I sent it to a different lab for confirmation." My gaze flicked back to the printout. Another stamp, another lab. Logo, same result. I swallowed hard, heart galloping. "So you're telling me we're only half biological? Like siblings, not spouses?" His lips trembled, something like that. My mind spiraled. 10 years of looking at him, trusting him, building a life on the premise that our DNA was ours alone. Sunday brunches, hospital waiting rooms, weddings of friends, all built on a foundation I now realized might be half missing. I folded the cardstock slowly, as if the numbers might vanish if I pressed them back into submission. He lifted my hand and placed it on his chest. I felt the strong, steady beat of his heart, the same heart I'd promised to love till death, do us part. I wanted to hold on to that, but a new fear pressed in, whose heart had shaped him, whose blood ran through his veins. I looked up, searching his face for explanations, but found nothing but raw regret. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I wanted to protect you from the fallout." I blinked, confusion and anger twisting together. "Fallout," I echoed. "You mean you thought I'd leave you over this?" He closed his eyes. "I didn't know how to tell you." My mind flashed back to all the late-night dinners he'd missed, the cryptic text messages, the locked study door. Each instance now felt like a desperate attempt to hide the revelation that he was only partly the man I thought I'd married. "So who are you then?" I asked, voice flat. "I don't know," he admitted. The test can't tell me who the other half is. He slid an additional sheet from the envelope, a sterile lab report with a cautionary note. Marker, discrepancy. Suggests one non-parental lineage. Further genealogical investigation recommended. I stared at the recommendation, my stomach twisting. He'd paid extra for that insider's suggestion. I sank onto the edge of the landing, folding my legs. Beneath me, he crouched beside me, hands trembling as he placed the envelope in my lap. I thought maybe it was a mistake, he muttered, but if it is, I need to know. I traced the lab's watermark, a silent symbol of the breach in our lives. Foundation? A lifetime of trust, shaken by a handful of scanned letters and numbers. I pressed my fingers to my temples, searching for the right reaction. Shock, betrayal, confusion, a quiet sorrow that felt deeper than any anger. The hall clock chimed 2 a.m., each bell echoing like a verdict. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. I never wanted this, he said, voice raw. I love you in every way that counts to me. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. Could love alone heal this rupture? I looked at his face, seeing the man I fell for in college, the boy who washed paint off my elbows, who taught our daughter to count by bouncing her on his knee, who held my hand through loss and triumph. Maybe that love still counted for something. I stood, envelope in hand, and turned toward the staircase railing. Below, the shadows of our life stretched out, the framed wedding portrait, the shelf of family photos, the little dresser where we kept tokens of every shared adventure. I hesitated, envelope clutched to my chest, and then I held it out to him. Is this everything? I asked. He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. Everything. I took a deep breath and folded the cardstock into thirds. My fingertips tingled as I slid it into the envelope, sealing it with a deliberate press. Tomorrow, I whispered, we'll decide together what to do. He exhaled, relief and fear mingling in that one breath. We stood in the silent hallway, the envelope between us like a fragile peace offering. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves, as if urging us forward, past the shock, into the next chapter. I leaned my forehead against his shoulder, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. Not DNA, not numbers, but a rhythm we both understood. The pulse of two lives intertwined. In the hush, I realized the revelation wasn't just about percentages. It was about trust fractured and the courage it would take to rebuild it. He had laid his secret bare, and I held the proof in my hands. Face the rumors that would surface and redefine our bond in the light of this unexpected divide. But for now, standing in the dim hallway, I closed my eyes and allowed a sliver of hope to glimmer. Because if love could survive the crack of those numbers, maybe it could survive anything. And in that moment, I chose to believe it might. Whispers started the moment the envelope slipped back into its hiding place. First, it was a text message from my sister Claire. Hey, are you okay? Heard about some DNA drama? I stared at the screen, heart pounding, convinced she'd heard it straight from him. Next, my mother called, her voice trembling. I just ran into Aunt Linda. She said she saw him in Des Moines with a little boy last summer. A toddler. For heaven's sake, do you know anything about that? I closed my eyes. My husband's past was becoming everybody's business overnight. The rumor mill churned faster than I could catch up. At brunch with old friends, I felt the weight of their sideways glances before any question was asked. Their smiles were tight, their compliments felt loaded. One friend, Maria, leaned across the table and said in a hushed tone, I hate to pry, but is this true? You two aren't who we thought you were. I forced a laugh and changed the subject. But inside I was reeling. By the next morning, our family group chat had exploded. Messages pinged in succession. Saw this online. Apparently he's not your husband's real father. I heard. He had a secret wife. Can you believe it? There's a blog post claiming he fathered another child in '05. I scrolled through threads of speculation, links to paywalled investigative sites, and screenshots of a defunct social media account that seemed to belong to a woman named Claire Martin, whose profile photo showed her with a little boy on her hip. Every detail felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. Our carefully curated life-hour townhouse, our vacations. Our daughter's birthday parties looked like a mirage crumbling in the desert heat of gossip. I confronted him in the early afternoon, standing in our still pristine living room, the sunlight streaming through sheer curtains. Did you have another family? I demanded, voice shaking. He looked away, jaw clenched. It's not like that, he said. I was 19 when I married Hirsch, was 19 too. We had David, then we separated. I never told you because I thought it was ancient history. I sank onto the sofa, stunned. Ancient history. The words rang false. I thought of the laughter at our wedding reception, the vows we exchanged, the life we'd built on mutual transparency. Now I felt like a stranger in my own story. That evening at my niece's 5th birthday party, the fallout spilled into the open. A dozen family members circled us on the lawn, their faces illuminated by string lights and the glow of a smartphone screen. Aunt Linda held up the photo of the little boy. Uncle Dan peered over her shoulder. "He looks just like him," Linda said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "doesn't he?" My young daughter ran up asking if she could have extra cake, and I swept her into my arms, shielding her from the prying eyes. I could feel the family's gaze drilling holes through my back as I left the circle and retreated to the shade under an oak tree. He followed, guilt etched across his face. "I'm sorry," he said, tracing a finger along a crack in the concrete. "I didn't think it would come out like this." By the next morning, even the local paper had picked up the story. Prominent tech CEOs, secret DNA reveals hidden lineage. The headline burned on my screen. Comments poured in. Some sympathetic, "poor woman, deserved to know." Others, "vicious guy's a liar. Hide your daughters," and dozens speculating about custody battles, inheritance, and scandalous cover-ups. My phone buzzed non-stop with notifications. I shut it off and took a long, bracing shower. When I emerged, I felt like I'd scrubbed away the last traces of our life's veneer, but I was left raw. My mother showed up unannounced, a small overnight bag in hand. She sat on the edge of my bed and took my hands. "Sweetheart," she said, voice thick, "we love you. This doesn't define you." I held back tears, grateful and ashamed of how desperately I needed her reassurance. "I married a man. I thought I knew," I said, voice trembling. "Now I'm not even sure who he is." She squeezed my hand. "You're still you. You're the same daughter who helped me bake pies for the church bazaar. You're the aunt who reads bedtime stories. Nothing he did changes that." Her words were a lifeline in a storm of betrayal. Later that afternoon, I joined a Zoom call with my best friend, Jasmine, who'd flown home when she heard the news. We talked for hours, no holds barred. I told her about the envelope, the bedtime, confessions, the village gossip, the paper trail of pay-for-play DNA tests, even the lab leak that exposed so many private secrets at once. She listened, only interrupting to ask how I was feeling. I admitted I felt torn between rage, pity, and grief. "What do I do now?" I asked, voice raw. She paused, then said, "You do what you need to heal. If it's therapy, do it. If it's a pause in the marriage, do that. But don't let their rumors become your truth." I let her words sink in that night. As I lay in our bed, the house silent except for the hum of the air conditioner, I realized the family fallout was just the beginning. Public opinion would be the real test. Soon, our daughter's schoolmates would ask why her last name had been in the tabloids. My colleagues would whisper behind my back. Friends might drift away, not wanting to be tainted by proximity. I thought of his trembling apology and wondered if love, no matter how deep, could withstand this. But then I recalled my mother's unwavering support and Jasmine's steadfast loyalty. Maybe, I thought, maybe we could rebuild a new normal. I sat up, heart pounding. Tomorrow, I would call a family meeting, face the rumors head on. I'd invite my sister, my mother, Aunt Linda, even the cousin Carla whose shady photographs had triggered the latest gossip storm. I'd speak my truth before theirs could burst out unchecked. And then I would decide, do I fight for this marriage or let the revelation envelope become the final straw? I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled slowly. One thing was clear, the days of quiet denial were over. The next chapter would be about confronting the fallout and discovering whether trust could be reborn from ruins. I didn't want to believe the whispers, but by the time dawn broke 2 days later, I was dialing the number of a private investigator. My husband stood at the edge of our bedroom, arms crossed as I paced back and forth, replaying every odd text. Every hushed phone call at midnight. "I just need to know," I said, voice cracking. He nodded, exhaustion and guilt written all over his face. The next morning, the investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Laura, arrived at our door with a leather-bound notebook and a business card that felt cold in my hand. She explained she specialized in uncovering hidden family ties, exactly what I needed. I handed her everything I'd collected so far. The DNA report, the lab receipts, the few photographs from social media. "I'll find him," I told her, more to reassure myself than anything else. 2 days later, Laura called. "I have something," she said tersely. My heart lurched. She arranged to meet me at a quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of neighbors. I sat at a corner table, stirring my coffee so fast the cup rattled, until she slid into the seat across from me and placed her notebook between us. "I found a record," she said, tapping the page. My breath caught when I saw it. A birth certificate for a child named David Martin, born June 14, 2005, in Springfield, our hometown, until his company uprooted us 3 years later. The certificate, listed my husband's full name as father and a woman named Claire Martin as mother. No middle initial for Claire, no address, just that stark line. I stared at it, disbelief twisting into shock. Laura went on. I tracked down the hospital records. There was a single mother, Claire, admitted under a private billing code. She checked in alone, no partner name listed. After David's birth, her record disappears. No forwarding address, no contact. The revelation hit me like a train. My husband had fathered another child. He'd never told me. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Our daughter had been born 2 years later. New life after old wounds. Or so I thought. Instead, I'd unknowingly stepped into the role of stepmother to a child I didn't even know existed. Laura continued, unfurling another page, a series of public records showing Claire's last known residence, a modest apartment 2 blocks from the address my husband had given me when he said he was transferred. She moved to Chicago in '07, Laura said, but never filed a change of father's information. That suggests they lost contact. Probably she didn't want to pursue child support or recognition. My throat tightened as I realized how alone Claire must have felt, raising her son with no support. My husband's silence became a betrayal of 2 lives. When I got home, I found him on the couch, staring at the floor as though expecting me to lash out. I laid the birth certificate on his lap. He trembled. I lost her number, he whispered, eyes burning with shame. She left town after David's first birthday. I tried to find her but got nothing. My jaw clenched as I thought of the dozens of times he'd promised me he had no secrets. Now every promise felt like a lie. I pressed him for more. His confession came in ragged breaths. He'd been 19, overwhelmed by a secret marriage, a sudden baby, and his own father's scorn. Claire had insisted on privacy. He'd respected her wishes and buried the truth, hoping to build a fresh start with me. But Laura's last finding was the most damning. A series of emails between him and a private attorney in 2018 discussing wills and estate planning for David M., codename for the son I never knew he had. He'd set up a trust, squirreled away significant funds under a blind trust in David's name. His rationale: he would eventually explain everything to me when the time was right. By then, the trust would provide for both of our children equally. Yet he'd never brought it up, never drafted me into this plan. He'd made decisions about our shared assets without my knowledge. My hands shook as I read the attorney's detailed notes. Ensure confidentiality clause binding spouse until disclosure strategy executed. Disclosure strategy: he had a plan to keep me in the dark. I looked up at him, furious and hurt. You betrayed me and your own son, I said, voice low but fierce. You decided everything on your own. He nodded, tears pooling. I thought I was protecting everyone, protecting you from scandal, protecting David from abandonment. But I see now, I was just protecting myself. In that moment, I realized the damage ran deeper than gossip or hidden siblings. It was a fracture in our marriage, a unilateral choice where there should have been partnership. The next step felt inevitable. Finding Claire. With Laura's help, we tracked Claire's current address through a last-ditch phone number pulled from hospital staff notes. It led us to a suburban street lined with maple trees, a quiet cul-de-sac that felt worlds away from our tidy neighborhood. I remembered the day I first walked down our tree-lined road, dreaming of marriage, children, and a home. Now I was knocking on another woman's door, about to face the unintended consequences of my husband's silence. Claire opened the door in an old bathrobe, her hair in wisps, eyes wide with cautious recognition when I introduced myself as his wife. She led us inside a cramped living room, walls lined with her son's artwork, a small bookshelf cluttered with parenting manuals. Her face softened when our investigator explained who we were and why we'd come. I watched Claire's shoulders slump as she realized the years of unanswered letters and missed calls had been more than neglected, been intention. Tears streamed down Claire's cheeks as she whispered, I thought he forgot me entirely. I reached for her hand, unsure whether to apologize for his past or to thank her for raising him without bitterness. David, now 19 and with his own college diploma framed on the wall, entered and froze at the sight of me. I introduced myself, voice breaking, and he nodded in a way that said forgiveness was a universe away. We spent the afternoon untangling years of assumptions, Claire's account of a fleeting marriage, my husband's guilt-laden disappearances, David's childhood marked by a father who vanished without explanation. When it was time to leave, we left promises to rebuild trust, slowly legal steps to modify the trust, visits to get to know David, family counseling to navigate this new reality. I felt a strange weight lift and settled somewhere deeper, the burden of ignorance replaced by the burden of knowledge. Driving home, I glanced at my husband, who drove with a clenched jaw, staring straight ahead. Beside him sat the investigator's folder proof of our journey into hidden truths. I realized that secrets have a way of clawing their way into the light, and when they do, the fallout can reshape lives forever. But in the wreckage, there's also a chance for honesty to forge new bonds. I reached over and squeezed his hand. He looked at me, eyes red but resolute. In that silent moment, we both knew the road ahead would be anything but easy, but at least it would be walked in the open. He stared at me across the kitchen table, the dossier of evidence between us like a loaded gun. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, casting lines of light and shadow across his face. He swallowed, fingers tapping the edge of the folder in a frantic rhythm. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "If this ever gets out, everything I've built will collapse. My reputation, my business, our family's future, it all dies." His words landed on me like a blow. I felt the air rush from my lungs as I realized the gravity of his plea. His career, his livelihood, and our shared stability depended on my silence. Asterisk. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the courage to continue. "I know I've hurt you," he said slowly, voice shaking. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess. I ordered the DNA test because I needed answers. But once I saw the results, my first thought was how to protect you and me from the fallout. I set up trusts and payments, handled legal issues behind the scenes, and hired people who would keep their mouths shut. I thought I could manage it, keep it buried, until I'd sorted out the details. But you found out, and now I have to ask, you please, keep this between us." My hands knotted together beneath the table. His eyes were pleading, haunted by fear. I took a slow breath, my mind racing. On one hand, I understood. He'd poured years into building his tech company from the ground up. He'd taken risks, worked late nights, sacrificed vacations, and endured boardroom battles, all in service of a dream that now supported our comfortable life. The house in the suburbs, the private school tuition, the family vacations overseas. If that collapsed, we'd be exposed not just as a husband with a secret child, but as a wife who had unknowingly shared her life with a man whose past she never fully knew. We'd be the scandal that every tabloid would chase, but on the other hand, how could I consent to silence? My conscience screamed that truth deserved to be told. I thought of Claire and David, whom he'd abandoned in his 20s. I thought of the years they'd spent wondering if he cared at all, the missed birthdays and milestones. How many other lives did his secrets warp? And here I was, asked to guard the secret as if it were a precious object, rather than a betrayal. My chest tightened as I weighed loyalty against justice, love against integrity. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen, I know it's a lot to ask, but I thought you loved me enough to trust that I made these decisions with everyone's best interests at heart. You have to believe me, I'm terrified of losing everything." His gaze flickered to the dossier, his fortress of paperwork and unsigned affidavits. "If this leaks, my investors pull out. Our daughter's future is uncertain, and I'll be fighting a custody battle with David's mother. I can't afford to lose you too." He paused, vulnerability etched in the lines around his eyes. "I can't face that, Emily. Please, don't do that to me." Silence stretched between us, heavy as iron. I stared down at the table, the dossier's edges cutting into my palms through the thin wood. In that silence, I felt the weight of the ultimatum settle around me like a shroud. Keep silent, save him and by extension, save Oos from ruin. Or speak the truth, risk everything, and stand by principles I'd thought defined me. My throat tightened until words felt impossible. His voice broke the quiet. "I'm begging you," he said, voice trembling. "I need you on my side. If you walk away from this, if you open your mouth, I don't know how I'll survive." My breath trembled as I looked up, meeting his gaze. I saw the man I fell in love with, the one who held my hand through losses, who laughed at my worst jokes, who wiped tears from my face when my mother died. But I also saw the man who created intricate webs of secrecy, who assumed I'd stand by without question. The man who demanded protection for himself when he denied protection to others. Every instinct inside me screamed in conflict. At that moment, I realized an ultimatum wasn't a request for loyalty, was an attempt to control my conscience. He was asking me to choose between protecting his empire and protecting my integrity. I clenched my jaw and let the silence stretch. Finally, I drew in a slow breath and said, "You want me to be your shield, but you never thought about the cost to me? The lies, the hidden life, the family you kept secret, do you know how that feels?" My voice wavered with pain. "I need to protect my own heart." His shoulders sagged as if the fight drained out of him. "So what are you going to do?" he whispered, despair in his tone. I hesitated, thoughts colliding like thunderclouds. I had always believed that marriage meant facing storms together, but this was no ordinary storm. It was a tempest born of his half-truths. I couldn't simply hold his hand through it without losing myself. I stood slowly, the chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. I placed my hand on the dossier. I love you, I said, voice firm. But love isn't a blank check. To bury the truth, I won't sign a lifetime waiver of honesty. I met his eyes, unwavering. I need time to think. I need to speak with Claire, with David, and with a lawyer. I have to know I'm making the right decision, not just for us, but for everyone involved. He closed his eyes, a flicker of relief and fear crossing his expression. All I can offer is my honesty now, he said quietly. I'll answer any questions you have. I'll stand by you through whatever comes next. I hope you'll stay. He sounded more vulnerable than I'd ever heard him. In that vulnerability, I recognized the man underneath all the secrets, a man so terrified of collateral damage that he chose silence over clarity. I gathered my thoughts into a nod. I need the truth, I said. All of it. He exhaled, relief mingling with trepidation. Ask away, he said, voice broken. I looked at the dossier, at the paper trail of trusts and lab reports, then back at him. Tell me everything you did and why. I need to decide with full knowledge. His face shifted, acceptance illuminating his features. I will. That night I lay awake in our bed, the secret ultimatum echoing in my mind. Save him by my silence or embrace the storm of truth and risk losing everything. The weight of his request lay heavy on my chest, but beneath it, another weight settled, the weight of my own agency. The choice was Manoa Nels's, and as sleep finally claimed me, I drifted on the promise that tomorrow I would stand in the light, armed not by silence, but by truth. I stood in the doorway of our living room, the afternoon light dancing across scattered papers and unopened mail, feeling the weight of every choice I'd made crashing into this one decisive moment. I had traced his secrets across state lines, confronted whispers in my own family, and sat across from Claire and David in a cramped apartment, where the truth had finally been laid bare. I'd watched my husband's eyes, once confident and unflinching, cloud over with fear, guilt, and the desperate hope that I'd protect him from the storm he'd unleashed. And now, after nights of restless turning and days of charged conversations, it came down to this. Would I shield him once more, preserving our life of comfort and his empire built on secrecy? Or would I stand in the light with the broken pieces of our trust and demand a new path forward, unafraid of the consequences? My hands hovered over the dossier on the coffee table, the final evidence of the hidden chapters he'd never intended me to read. The birth certificate, the lab reports, the encrypted emails with his attorney. I remembered his trembling plea. If this gets out, I lose everything. He'd promised to rectify past wrongs, to bring Claire into our lives gently, to establish transparent arrangements for David's future alongside our daughters. But promises spoken in shadows have a way of dissolving when exposed to daylight. I had asked him for full disclosure, and he'd delivered, shaking in the early hours of one terrible morning. He'd shown me the trust documents he'd drawn up in secret. He'd willingly scheduled meetings with lawyers and counselors. He'd apologized with a sincerity I'd never known he possessed. Yet despite his effort, I sensed that nothing would truly rebuild our bond until I made a choice that honored both our past and my own integrity. So I returned to that sofa, sat down with my laptop open on the coffee table, and drafted an email not to a tabloid or a competitor, but to my closest circle of friends and family. I wrote 4 simple paragraphs. The first acknowledging the revelation and my need for space, the second explaining that I intended to meet with Claire and David alongside him to forge a new, honest foundation. The third acknowledging that our story would soon be public, and asking for their support rather than judgment. And the fourth expressing my intent to stand by him, but only if he continued to live transparently, without ultimatums or hidden agendas. I paused before hitting send, my fingers shaking over the trackpad, and realized that this letter was my declaration of independence, not from him, necessarily, but from the fear and silence that had held me captive. When he came home that evening, I found him in the kitchen, weary, running a hand through his hair. I set the laptop aside and looked him in the eye. I've informed everyone who matters to me, I said, voice calm but firm. His shoulders stiffened. He looked away. I waited for panic or anger, but instead, he exhaled deeply. I understand, he murmured. I'm ready. That simple admission, offered without evasion, felt like a bridge being rebuilt. Tomorrow, I said, we meet with Claire and David together. We figure out how to be a family in whatever way that means. And from today forward, no more secrets. His eyes glistened with relief and fear, but most of all with love that had finally chosen honesty over expedience. Over the next week, our lives shifted. We drafted a mediated plan, attended therapy sessions as a trio, and decided on weekly updates to our shared digital calendar so nothing could be hidden again. Our daughter, wise beyond her years, asked why we were all meeting so much. We explained gently that families come in different shapes, but love and respect must always be the glue. She nodded, accepting the new configuration of cousins, half-siblings, step-parents, and aunts and uncles, and went off to draw a mural of all of us smiling under a rainbow. It was her way of offering hope that even difficult truths could lead to richer, more authentic bonds. As I lay in bed that night, scrolling through supportive messages from friends who'd witnessed my announcement, I felt a quiet pride I hadn't known I was capable of. Pride in choosing truth, even when it threatened to unravel my world. Pride in standing up for the lives of not just my immediate family, but also the child who'd been hidden for so long. But most of all, pride in the knowledge that sometimes love isn't about protecting someone at all costs. It's about guiding them back to honesty, even if the path is painful. I realized that the secret ultimatum he'd issued, the plea for silence, had been his own admission of fear, and in facing it head-on, I reclaimed my voice. So here's the question I leave you with. Not as a judge, but as someone who's walked through this very fire. If you discovered a truth so powerful it could shatter your life's foundation, what would you do? Would you gather the courage to confront it, risking the ruin of the comfortable world you knew? Or would you hide behind silence, preserving the status quo at the expense of your own integrity? And if you chose transparency, could you find the compassion to rebuild relationships on the fragile ground of honesty? In the end, the story I've lived in now shared reminds me that our greatest strength lies not in avoiding storms, but in learning to dance in the rain, hand in hand, with those we love, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings.